Hey everybody, it's John. I hope you're all doing well. Today I have a specific story for my British friends. Now, this is an American Confederacy story, but I think it's one that you might find extremely interesting. This is about Robert Smalls. Let's get into it. It's one of the shortest videos I could find, so let's unpack this.
Outsmarting the Confederacy to free his family from enslavement was only the beginning. Robert Smalls was born into enslavement on April 5th, 1839, in
Right.
Beaufort, South Carolina.
Right.
But by the age of 25, he'd schemed a way to freedom for himself and 15 other enslaved people by stealing a Confederate ship.
Okay.
Smalls was already forcibly working on a ship called the Planter when the Civil War began, and the vessel's owner leased it to the Confederacy.
Okay, one thing to know about Smalls is that he was in the midst of purchasing his own freedom when the Civil War broke out for himself and his wife, I believe. So he had grown up all around the Charleston, South Carolina area, and then had lived in what is Beaufort, that area.
He was kept on the crew and worked closely with the ship's captain.
Right.
But little did the commander know that Smalls was studying his every move. By 1862, the Union Navy had blockaded all major southern ports. Smalls.
So one of the things about the Civil War is they called the Anaconda Plan. The North during the Civil War was going to create a large navy. Actually, they had one of the, if I'm not mistaken, the largest navy by the end of the Civil War. It was 600 and some ships, almost 700. In Charleston Harbor, the harbors were all sort of blockaded up, but they would have these blockade runners that would run in and out, and there were a series of signals that you would give, and you'd get out at night. And one of the things was that Robert Smalls was one of the best boat pilots there was. Now, it turns out that he was black, and so that was obviously a problem. He, was kind of it was somebody's property at the time, is what it was considered, and but it turned out he was one of the best naval captains there certainly was. And anyway, so here we go.
Realized that delivering the Planter to the fleet of Union ships located outside the Charleston harbor meant gaining his freedom.
Yeah.
If he could make it there.
So he wasn't going to gain. He realized he was not going to be able to purchase his freedom because he was allowed side jobs. Everyone sort of had their own way of doing things in the South during the slavery era, and so you could, aside from getting your work done for your master, your owner, really, was that you could get side jobs if you were a slave and earn money. And he was able to do this, and he was trying to purchase his freedom.
So he spent his time learning the coded
It wasn't going to happen during the Civil War.
signals he would need in order to make it past Confederate checkpoints. On the night of May 12, 1862, after the white crew went ashore, Smalls, with the help of his fellow enslaved crew members, commandeered the ship.
Yeah, so it was illegal for anyone that was in the Confederate service to leave sort of their post on the ships. There were not very many of them compared to the Union Navy, so keeping them under a watchful eye was important. But bottom line is they went on land to get I don't know, girls, to go out drink, whatever it was they did, but they left their post, and they left Robert Smalls there, and he realized this was his opportunity to get his family and sail to freedom. And anyway, here we go.
With Smalls at the helm, the men sailed the ship to pick up their families, who were waiting to board the ship. Dressed in the captain's hat and clothes and mimicking his mannerisms, Smalls sailed the Planter past Confederate forts toward Union territory. With his in-depth knowledge of Navy signals and the Confederate flag flying high, no one suspected a thing. And by the time the Confederacy sounded the alarm, it was too late.
There's even an account that he says that when he was leaving one of the final areas, this is the Fort Sumpter area. No, it's not the Fort Sumpter area, I believe. Maybe it is. That he was leaving, and because it was dark and he was wearing this the hat of the captain. I didn't quite know who he was, but that it wasn't the captain, I should say. And one of the Confederates said, bring us back some dead Yankees. And he said something like, sure will, or something like that. And it was kind of a weird, kind of surreal thing.
But now, Smalls and the other passengers had to surrender the ship to the U.S. Navy
Yes.
without being attacked. Realizing that the Confederate flag was still hoisted as they approached the Union ships, the men quickly replaced it with a white bedsheet, signaling the surrender of their ship.
All right, now just so you have an idea of who this guy was, have you ever met like a trustworthy person that you could just you liked, you could trust, um, and you'd say, look, could you watch this? Yeah, and it wouldn't be an issue. And he had built so much trust and such a rapport that when he did this, it was just like amazement to people. So it turns out that they, he when he left, they left him in charge of the boat, and nobody had really a second thought of it apparently. And then of course he had this whole elaborate plan. Now he had to, of course, surrender to the Union Navy.
Had successfully sailed the 16 people aboard the Planter from enslavement to freedom. But he didn't stop there. The story of Smalls's escape earned him respect across the North.
Yes, it's very true. So he became a superstar early on in 1862 when the war was certainly not going the way the North wanted it to. He talked about his escape, and he was actually given money for the Planter, and he was also given a captaincy for essentially the Union Navy.
And infamy throughout the South. He was reportedly awarded $1,500 by Congress for his daring escape, estimated to be approximately half the price of the Planter. While Confederate...
Oh, I know what I want to say. So if he had gotten caught, he and everybody on board the ship certainly would have been killed, by the way. That's important. That's what I wanted to say earlier.
Forces reportedly placed a $4,000 bounty on his head. The Planter became a Union Navy troop transport ship, and Smalls was named captain, making him the first black person in the U.S. Navy to be given the title. Captain Smalls also commanded an ironclad vessel called Keokuk, during which time he used his knowledge of Confederate mines and movements to aid Union war efforts.
So yes, he had very intimate knowledge of the waterways in the area of Beaufort, and in Charleston to a certain extent. I mean, the guy grew up on the water. You know what it is if you're in like Liverpool or if, some big port town. So when it came time for the Union Navy to start pushing inward, and they did this. They actually landed on the outside islands on the eastern seaboard of the United States. They created in Beaufort what became known as like a freed slave community, where they essentially they didn't know or didn't have any idea. Could they be educated? Couldn't they? I mean, this is the truth. They asked them like questions like, would you rather go back to slavery? Like they asked all this whole thing of questions that everyone had to answer. Like, yes, no, like, would you like education? Does that sound interesting to you? What are your, what do you know how to do? And they set up schools and communities and basically anything that was contraband. So by the time it got back to, the war went on and got back to Small's original home, he ended up buying it because in the North, the South was considered in rebellion. So that was back taxes as far as they were concerned. And so the house went up for auction. Well, he had earned so much money. He actually bought his former master's house outright because of, well, he didn't pay his taxes. And that's how a lot of the land in the South was confiscated and changed, especially the larger plantations.
After the rebel South fell to Northern forces, Captain Smalls returned to Beaufort, South Carolina with his family and purchased a home in which he and his mother were once enslaved.
Interesting side note on Smalls, and this is why I think, he is such a hero. This speaks volumes to him. So he owns the house now. His master comes back and he says, hey, this is my house. And Smalls says, no, unfortunately, I purchased it. You didn't pay your taxes, whatever. And he actually lets his former master, stay with him. And he sets a dinner table for him, has dinner, and sets all the seats so they could eat. And the former master refused to eat with him. Smalls took his family to the other room and let his master have dinner there in the dining room. And then when it came time for sleeping, they refused to sleep in an area where his slave Smalls and his family were sleeping. So they moved out of the rooms and let his master stay there for, I'm not quite sure how long, until they sort of got back together on their feet. But he was really forever connected with his boat, the Planter. And this is an interesting story. This is just, to me, this is an amazing story because it starts off with a bang, just like this. And I believe it's being made into a movie.
Smalls leveraged his notoriety to improve the quality of life for Black people in his home state.
He did.
And eventually across the country. In 1867, he helped establish a school for Black children and served on the county's school board. His advocacy for equitable public education made him a prominent political figure in his community during the Reconstruction era.
Yes. So he served, okay, they're going to say it right here. There it is. He served in office for so long. And what basically happened was most of the South, when there was Reconstruction after the Civil War, they had to become states again. And they had to go through a series of things. And one of the things that you could do was men, not women, but men, and now Black men were allowed the right to vote. Okay, and that happened in the South. And a lot of these guys were Republicans, which were the party of Abraham Lincoln. And there was a lot of them that were voted, within to the, like in this particular case, the South Carolina House of Representatives, Congress, Senate, and they were people that really cared about their community. That they thought that there was a lot that they could do to help, and they were very much elected until, of course, small bits of these former Confederates, people who like of course were in favor of the way of doing it in the past, were not thrilled with having these Black politicians in power, and they changed. They had these laws, they had intimidation tactics, all sorts of stuff. That's another video. And he was one of the last surviving politicians.
And in 1868, he was elected to the South Carolina House of Representatives.
Okay.
He also later served in the state Senate. In 1874, Smalls was elected to the U.S. Congress and served in the U.S. House of Representatives for more than a decade.
He did.
In 1974, the House was...
So, interesting thing about Smalls. This video is not getting... It will not tell you all the detailed stuff. How he, many times he survived with the United States Navy, leading troops ashore, all sorts of stuff, almost getting captured. He was an interesting guy, and full of courage. And of course, afterwards, he was one of the last, if I'm not mistaken, surviving, last in office senators. And basically, they basically forced him out. So the one thing that he basically did was he made a deal. And he took a piece of land and he said, look, at least make this for the Navy. Set this aside for the Federal Navy. He did that because he felt that he owed them his freedom in a way. They gave him a job. They gave him $1,500. They did all sorts of stuff. So he really had a soft spot for the Navy. This land today is called Parris Island, and it's where all the Marines go to train. So if you're in the United States, if you're a citizen and you sign up for the Marines, you go to Parris Island. That's where you get your training, and it's because of Robert Smalls. And I believe it was a specific deal he made not to run again for elected office.
Smalls lived at 511 Prince Street in Beaufort, South Carolina.
There's the house.
Designated as a National Historic Landmark.
Look at that. Now, can you imagine if you're the owner of that and the Civil War ends, you come back, because the Union had come into the area, right? So everything was confiscated. So the owner obviously moved further inland and came back to that.
And in 2017, former President Barack Obama established the Reconstruction Era National Historic Park in Beaufort County. Captain Robert Smalls was recognized by the former president as the most influential African-American politician in South Carolina during the Reconstruction Era.
His story is nothing but miraculous. Just a fascinating guy. And the thing is in American history, they don't teach you about this kind of stuff. But the Civil War is a fun topic. I don't want to say fun, but it's full of heroic people, cowardly people, amazing deeds, new technology, new changes. It's probably, to me, the most interesting watershed moment, time where people take a stand, some not for good reasons and some for really good reasons. And it's a huge change. I mean, it's the beginning of World War I tactics. It's the end of Napoleonic tactics. Sort of, this whole, and a societal change with, a president who is willing to make sacrifices to make these things happen. Guys, if you didn't know Robert Smalls, leave a comment. But I find the guy fascinating, and I wanted to tell you this story. I think this video is probably a good one. Most of them that are out there are a little longer, I'm sure, but I figured they wouldn't add the parts that I thought was important. But it's very succinct nonetheless. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really does help out, and I'd appreciate it. If you like this, let me know, and I'll do more like this.